Hi everyone, welcome back to the Edgewater Avenue YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be making the new Oakley bottoms. These are the perfect 80s style, high on the hips, high waist, that type of bikini bottom, and I'm really excited to share them with you. So let's get right into it. So for materials, you will need swimwear fabric, swimwear elastic, here I'm using 1/4 inch, a seam ripper, a cutting tool like a rotary cutter or scissors. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be using a regular sewing machine as well as my serger. If you don't have a serger, you're fine. You can use a zigzag stitch wherever I use an overlock stitch. And if you don't have a regular machine, you can make these bottoms fully reversible style. But for this tutorial and the way this pattern is made, the seams of the butt are meant to be fold over seams and not concealed seams. So I'll get more into that as we get into the process, but just be aware that you probably do want to have both machines. The last thing you'll need is the PDF pattern for the Oakley bottoms, which is available now at edgewateravenue.com, edgewaterav.com. Either way, it'll get you to the same place. So first we need to cut our pieces, and we're going to cut a total of 2 in each pattern piece. The pattern comes with a front piece and a back piece, and I'm using 2 different fabrics in this, so I'm gonna cut 1 in each fabric. There is a 1/4 inch of seam allowance included, so there's no need to cut any extra. Once you have your pieces, you need to cut your band pieces, and this band folds over at the top. There isn't a seam there, so whichever color you choose for your band, this is going to show on either side of the bottoms. The measurements for the band pieces are included inside the pattern. Now we have our pieces, and this construction method is going to be a little different than usual. Our first step is going to be attaching the bands onto the front pieces and onto the back pieces. So first you can focus on your front pieces. You're gonna match right sides together, the waistline of the front piece with one side of the band. Pin there, and then you're gonna do the same thing with your other front piece. Pin the waistline to the band, right sides together, and pin. Then same thing with your back pieces. You're going to align right sides together along that waistline. Do that for both of the back pieces onto that band. So now we're going to sew this band in place, and we're going to treat the front and back a little bit differently. For the back piece, I'm going to be using a basting stitch, which is a very long straight stitch that's intended to be removed. This is just to tack that fabric together temporarily, and later on we're going to do our final stitch. For the front piece, we need to treat it a little bit special. Instead of a basting stitch that's meant to be removed, you do want to use a permanent stitch for this part. At the very least, you'll want to use a zigzag stitch or an overlock stitch about 1 inch in from either side. I know this can be kind of confusing, so there are written directions that might be able to show this a little better.
Hi, so I'm editing the video and I saw that I did a pretty astonishingly horrible explanation of what I'm talking about. So I just wanted to show you really quickly to clarify. So I said we're gonna treat the front and the back differently when we're sewing these bands. So here's my back piece. I did a basting stitch all the way to sew the band piece in. And then in the next step, we're gonna take care of it and sew the band down in a different way. But this is what the back piece should look like. So it's just a basting stitch all the way. There's the band in the middle, and then our front and back, or our lining and outer. And so it looks like that. But then for the front piece, I said you need to leave some area on the end that needs to have a permanent stitch. So in the center here, you can go in with a basting stitch. But for like, I'd say like through here, on both sides, about that far in, you want to do a zigzag stitch or an overlock stitch. So I'll show you what that's gonna look like. All right, so I have just a little bit on each edge sewn. And now we're gonna go through, and in between these two, we're gonna do the basting stitch like we did for the back piece. So do that there, and then do that there. And then you can move on. So here's what that front piece looks like with the band. Half kind of sewn in, half with that little basting stitch.
So now that our bands are attached, we're going to first focus on our back piece. So first we did a basting stitch to attach the band in, and now we're going to be doing our final stitch. But this time we're going to be sewing across 4 layers of fabric. And the way you're going to do this is by tucking in that band and matching up those 2 basting stitches you just sewed. By sewing this seam here, that's going to seal in that band so it's not wiggling around as the garment is being worn. So sew down that band with an overlock stitch or a zigzag stitch if you don't have a serger. Once you've done that, you can take this back piece to the right side and you'll see we have this nice secured in band that looks great. So like I mentioned earlier, these bottoms are not fully reversible, and on the butt cheeks, there's gonna be fold over seams. This is really gonna help them stay in place, and I don't know, I just kind of wanted to experiment with different types of bottoms. So your back piece should be right side out right now. And what we're gonna do with these leg holes is sew some fold over seams. The way I like to do this is first using my overlock machine and sewing the leg holes together while at the same time attaching elastic. Then later on, I'm gonna fold over that seam and top stitch it. So here I'm using my overlock stitch and sewing in my elastic. And you do wanna have a bit of stretching in your elastic so that this seam is nice and secure and just fits really nice. And as far as stretching, you can do this a couple different ways. 1, you can reduce the seam by 1 to 3%. 2, you can use an elastic foot like I'm doing here. You're going to tighten that knob until it has just a little bit of stretch, nothing too crazy that'll make it bunchy, but just enough. Or 3, if you don't have an elastic foot, you can stretch the elastic as you're sewing, just keep an eye on it, and it's very doable. So once that elastic is on, step 2 of this fold over seam is folding it over, and I'm gonna be using a zigzag stitch and just sewing it right on down. Also, if you have a cover stitch machine, you can do this all in one step. You don't have to do the serger first and then the zigzag. I just really like the look of the zigzag, but do whatever you want. So that's gonna complete our back piece for now, so put it aside. Now we're gonna be focusing on our front piece. And on our front piece, we do have it reversible style. So it has those concealed seams on the leg holes. So our first step is going to be sewing those leg holes. Match the pieces with right sides together, and then sew and attach elastic onto each of the leg holes. For this step, you do not want to stretch the elastic unless you want to. It makes a tighter fit, but it also tends to scrunch and just make the garment look a little weird, at least when it's flat. So that's totally your choice. I choose not to stretch my elastic for this. Okay, so those leg holes are sewn up, and now we're gonna be doing some weird stuff with the band again. Again, what I really wanna do with this band is secure it in so it's not moving around when the garment is worn. But at the same time, I'm going to need to attach my sides and my gusset later on, so I don't wanna secure in that band to where I can't move the back piece inside of the front piece, which we'll get to that when we get to that. So first, I'm going to use an overlock stitch or a zigzag stitch, and I'm gonna sew in that band just like we did with the back piece where we have it kind of sandwiched inside. But I am just going to sew that middle section just a little bit. I would leave like 3 or so inches on either side completely untouched for now. You're going to want to leave enough open at the edges so that you're able to fully access those sides. So again, with that band folded inside, I'm going to be using an overlock stitch and secure in that band just a little bit. Next, we're gonna be attaching the front and back pieces together. And here is where you will see why I decided to leave some room on the sides of the band for that front piece. So first step, make sure your back piece is fully right side out. Then you're gonna insert it inside of the front piece, and you're gonna align it at the sides and the gusset. So right here is exactly why we didn't sew that band completely down. As you see, you're gonna be able to finagle those sides so that you can sew a stitch right across them. And that's gonna sew in the band as well as the sides of the front and back. Here I'm gonna be using a straight stitch and sewing 1/4 inch in from the edge to make sure that I'm accounting for my seam allowance. So we're doing a lot of back and forth in this tutorial with the band and how to treat it, and we're gonna do that one more time. So I'm gonna be able to get a little bit closer to the edges of that band, but I'm not gonna be able to sew completely over it. So I'm gonna be using my overlock stitch, and I'm just gonna sew one more time and get as close to the edges as I can so that that band is secured in. So if you remember at the very beginning of this tutorial, I said that for the sides, for at least like 1 inch or so, you need to have a stitch there that is going to stay, either a zigzag or an overlock. And this is exactly why. You're not gonna be able to sew across this entire band because there is a little piece of that band folded under. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you sew across it, you're not gonna be able to take it to the right side. So once that band is sewn as much as we can, we're gonna take our seam ripper and seam rip the hole somewhere along an existing seam. I like to do it at the very bottom of the leg hole, kind of towards the gusset. Through this hole, take everything to the right side, and then you're gonna finish off your hole either with an invisible stitch by hand, or you can use a top stitch like a zigzag or a straight stitch. That completes the Oakley bottoms, and here is how they turned out. After I filmed the video, I ended up making some changes to the pattern. So that's why these are an entirely different pair than what I was filming the whole time. But yeah, these are the Oakley bottoms. Again, they are the perfect, just 80s style, like super high on the hips. They just make your legs look phenomenal. They're a really cute style. They're versatile because you can make them with or without the band. You can make them reversible, or like I did in this tutorial. There are many options for you. So you can purchase the pattern for the Oakley bottoms now from edgewaterave.com. And thank you for watching this tutorial. I will see you next time.